Hello, Dude Mindfulness Collective. This right here, right now, is the joy of being a live stream coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. Lovely to see everyone here. Nick, thank you so much for the cheer. That's very kind of you. Very kind indeed. We have some people poking into the chat here earlier than even expected. Zechariah says, greetings and salutations from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was just in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania this weekend, and Seattle, Washington. Hope you are good in health. Welcome to the stream and life itself. Practicing is going fantastic. Lovely. I'm so happy to hear that. That's so kind. Oh, that's very kind of you. Thanks so much. Nick says, ambushing you from the Gothenburg office. Lovely. So that reminds me, thanks Nick for telling me, where are folks coming from? Where are you joining us from today? Where do we find you on this planet? Today is a fun day. Every few months I'll do a report from a from a strange experience, and I get to share that with you. So today is going to be that day. John, greetings, John. John, where are you joining us from? I think you're in... Geez, where in Brooklyn are you? I know you're in Brooklyn, but I forget exactly where you are. Welcome, everyone. So nice to see folks popping in. Great to be here with you. Excited for today to report the most recent psychedelic journey. It'll be an interesting one because it was sort of different in the past. Hello, all from Portland. Alex Rainleaf, nice to see you here. Jean from Brooklyn, great to see you as well. Nice to see you as always. And okay, so what's going on here? So I forgot to bring water today. So I'm hoping Raquel is going to poke back in at some point and be like, hey, would you like a water? Which I don't know if that's going to happen, but we'll see. Hello from New Orleans. This is K. Oh, it's hard to read for me. My eyes are having a hard time reading it. K. Camnair B. I'm probably reading that incorrectly. Jamaica, Queens. That's where you are. I don't know why I thought Brooklyn. I know you're in Queens. Okay. Excellent, folks. Super fun. Okay. So, who else? Where else are folks coming from? Okay. So, we're going to be doing a few things today. One is we're going to do a guided meditation, and then we're going to I'm going to describe and talk about my most recent therapeutic psychedelic journey, which is, if anyone is new to this channel, it's something that I do every few months, is work with a professional guide who does MAPS protocol guiding, and they guide through a psychedelic journey to sort of dive into some deep material. And so we're going to be talking about, I'm going to give a report from that. It's an interesting one. And I'm also going to, it's quite interesting. So I'll just give you a little prelude and then we'll do the meditation. The meditation will actually relate to the experience that I had. So there'll be a overlap there. The prelude is that it's just so funny to talk about this stuff. Because, Zechariah, hello. Thank you so much for that kind welcoming to folks. Beep pop 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 is what am I talking about? Beep pop pop pop. Okay, so it's interesting because this one really had to do with like the most vulnerable part of myself, which is just strange to even mention, let alone get into the details of what the most vulnerable part of myself thinks and how it relates to the world and its sort of fears and concerns and all of these things. So it's interesting when I do this because sometimes I'll watch the video later for whatever editing purposes or something, and I'll notice these details. It'll just seem like I'm just like, oh, talking about this thing, and everyone will sort of be like, oh yeah, you're just talking about a thing. But it's, my experience is it's literally the most vulnerable experience that I have. And then like getting into the details of that and like peeling away layers after layer. So it's very strange, and it feels very, I think the best word would be vulnerable. And it's sort of very funny in that way. So in that way, that's what we're going to be talking about. So hopefully that sounds like fun and maybe embarrassing for me, which is extra fun. Yeah, we're going to go from there. Let's see. Oh, Rory's joining us from Kingston and Tamerlan from India. Welcome, both of you guys. Great to see you here. Thanks so much. Oh, Tomlin's letting people know that we have a Discord where we chit-chat like kitty cats when we are not on stream. Exactly. And, okay, so folks, what we're going to do is we're going to meditate for 25 minutes. Because this is going to be a compassion-based meditation. Selly 1309, thank you so much for following. That's so kind of you. Welcome here to the stream. We have a nice way of, I think this is your first time here. I'm pretty sure it is. We have a nice way of welcoming you. I'm going to throw some goofs in the chat here. Welcome, welcome, as always. Thank you so much for being here with us. Lovely to have you, as always. So folks, we are going to meditate for 25 minutes. Here's how I'm going to recommend we do that. It's going to be a compassion-based meditation, so you want to find a nice comfortable position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit, but you're allowed to move. A couple rules. One is to make sure that you're only adjusting if you need to, and pausing to adjust if you can. Pausing, what was I going to say? I'm a little spaced. Beep up, beep up, up. Oh, we have a lovely subscriber here from Scott Nespin. That's so kind of you. Thank you, Scott, for subscribing. We really appreciate that. The beep up, beep up, up. Oh, and that was a gift sub from Nick. Nick, thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Scott, Nick is our very kind and generous support here. It is, it's Selly's first time here, so give Selly some love in the chat here. We are very appreciative of you and your presence, absolutely, and very appreciative. So thanks so much for joining us. So, and if it's anyone's first time meditating, let us know, because that's another extra bonus here. So we're going to meditate for 25 minutes. That might sound nearly impossible, but let me tell you right now, that is very much not the case. It is highly possible. And turn my phone off so it stops clicking the mic. Beep up is highly possible. And you're just going to hold the body still. If you feel like you need to move, just wait about 15, 30, a minute. And then allow the body to adjust very slowly. But you want to be kind to yourself and not, be too push. Alex Rainleaf is joining us as well. That's so wonderful to have you here. Okay, folks. So after the meditation, we'll go through and talk the details on the psychedelic journey, and hopefully that's fun. You can ask any questions you want about the process, what happened, anything I can remember. I noticed I remembered a lot less, and I was listening to the recording before this and was like, oh yeah, that part, this part. So we'll go over all of that. So folks, finding that nice comfortable position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit. One thing I want to outline before we start the meditation is as follows. So anytime we do a compassion meditation, this is what I've noticed. We're going to use a kind phrase, this kind of thing, and direct kindness and compassion to ourselves, especially in the West, in sort of Western countries, let's say maybe English-speaking countries. Somehow, I don't know why, all of this like decades, hundreds of years of colonialism has produced a thing where people will often feel hatred towards themselves. I don't know if there's a one-to-one corollary there, but there's definitely a relationship of those areas and people feeling self-hatred. Maybe it's capitalism, I don't know, who knows. But the point is that often when we try to direct compassion to ourselves, another voice pushes in and says, no, that's no good. Today, I want to be looking at this vulnerable part of ourself. So remember that when that voice comes in, which it probably will, it's inevitable, it's sort of natural. If we imagine right now, you can try to say like, oh, I love you to yourself. There's a character from Saturday Night Live called Stuart Smalley, and he would say all these sort of very sticky, sweet, phrases to himself, like "you're good enough" and "everyone likes you," this kind of thing. And some part of us bristles at that. And what I want to consider today is all of these parts that bristle and judge and I don't like this, these kind of things. There's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with that judgment. What is the key is that those parts do that because they feel unsafe. So there are parts of us that when we experience kindness and compassion feel unsafe. So that's not good or bad. It's just helpful to notice that part of us pushes against that, maybe doesn't believe it. In my experience, and I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to the report from the Psychedelic Journey, it is, we're going to be talking about that vulnerable part, for me at least, can often feel like it is it doesn't deserve that kind of kindness or that kind of love, or it's unsafe in some way. So folks, find that nice comfortable position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit. And when you're ready, we will begin. Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths, just feeling the body rise and fall. Each time we arrive at a meditation, we arrive with the momentum of all of the previous moments. So there's the intention to stay with this particular moment, the sensations of the body breathing, rising and falling. And then there's the momentum which greets our experience, the mind still being active from all of the thinking we've done throughout the day, throughout our lives. All of the lines of exploration, all of the to-do lists and duties that we have, all of this coming crashing into our intention to be present. And the key is that none of this is bad. It's simply the shape of reality in this moment. Physically relaxing the body. So there's large areas where we can relax the neck and torso, and the shoulders and hands, the hips and legs, and there's also all of the areas of micro relaxation, so the place where the muscle meets the bone. All of these tiny connections that we might not even be able to feel, but relaxing the body at this level. Almost as though if we let go deeply enough, the muscles themselves would just float off the bone. And as a way to help settle the mind, we're going to allow ourselves to stay with the breath for a little while. Noticing the way the belly expands, the shoulders rise, the upper chest and upper back expand and tighten. Relax and release with each breath. If the shoulders are rising and falling, then so are the elbows, just slightly. The elbows are rising and falling. This is tugging at the wrists. And we may even be able to detect the subtle sensation of the breath coming and going, pushing and pulling in the body all the way in the hands. Each time the body breathes in, as the chest and upper back expand, it straightens the spine just slightly. No need to control anything. So this straightening of the spine very subtly lifts the shoulders, which cause the spine and neck and head itself to lift just slightly. And the primary muscle responsible for all of this movement is the diaphragm. Low in the abdomen, it pushes and pulls the hips, widening and collapsing. Subtly rocking the tailbone. And if it's moving the hips and the tailbone, it's moving the upper legs and knees. And of course the knees move the calves and Achilles all the way down to the feet. So seeing if we can observe all of these sensations as one large collection, not worrying about the detail, one specific area, not trying to add each one together, but just getting an overall sense of everywhere in the body we can detect the breath. If it's only a small area, that's fine. And not worrying so much about the breath, simply holding the overall body's experience. Breath sensation may be included, but not worrying too much about it. We're going to introduce a phrase. And I'd like us to pay close attention to the effect that this phrase has. Some part of us will be able to accept it, and some parts will not. And that's not a problem. That's just nature. And the phrase is, may you be peaceful, may you be peaceful, may you be peaceful. Simply repeating the phrase. It doesn't have to feel like it's coming from you or directed to you. Just letting the phrase exist and come in contact with the body. As though we were just listening to the phrase. And the part of us that can accept this phrase and hear it, take in its meaning, enjoying that. We'll talk about the other part later, but for now, just soaking into the part that can accept this phrase. Maybe it's a lot of us, maybe it's a little of us. And it's possible that the part of us that doesn't connect with this phrase, perhaps pushing back with its own words, its own emotion. Maybe it says, this is silly, I don't like this, or just feels uncomfortable with it. It's not certain, but it's possible that this part is a vulnerable part. This part of us that in some way doesn't feel necessarily safe with this phrase. And so we're going to shift the focus to this part that may not be able to accept these words, and find a phrase that would be soothing. Maybe it's, I'm here with you, or I hear you, or I understand. Remembering it's important to not need to change any vulnerable part of ourselves that we find. And that part will tell us if the phrase works for it. And perhaps we never found a vulnerable part. It was simply easy to take in the initial phrase. So simply starting the process over with a more vulnerable phrase, like, I love you. I love you, directing it towards our overall experience of the body, looking for the part that can take that in and whatever part resists that. The resistance is simply a kind of turbulence which may indicate a part that's more vulnerable. Perhaps it doesn't like the phrase, and it's not supposed to. It doesn't need to like anything in particular. It's part of our job to find what would be soothing, what would be helpful. What would be comfortable for that particular part. And perhaps that even means letting it be. Focusing on something else, maybe returning to the breath. Simply being respectful of these various parts of ourself. And sometimes when we direct our kind phrase to a more vulnerable part, a fear can arise. A part of us may feel unsafe in taking in that kind of kindness. This is often called being guarded. A sense that taking in kindness could be dangerous or unstable. And so we may simply spend time with that fear, the subtle resistance itself. Perhaps using a phrase like, "I understand. I understand." We might even ask the part if it would like us to hold that fear for now, to put it aside, to relieve it of the need to feel that fear. Ultimately, we're simply learning to listen to these various parts. Learning to ask for what's needed, make intuitive choices, all based on a sense of release, relief, contentedness, or a sense of being soothed. And perhaps it's not words at all. Perhaps it's simply the way we hold the experience. Not needing the experience to be different, trying to get somewhere. Simply being with what is. Bringing kindness to the natural pushes and pulls within our system. Recognizing that resistance is natural. Pushback within the system is natural. Fear and vulnerability are natural and understandable. This recognition is the nature of compassion. Nothing that could be happening within us is wrong. It might be uncomfortable or even very uncomfortable. But it's part of the nature of being human. So letting go of any particular part, taking in all of your sensory experience at this moment. As though we're taking a snapshot of everything this body-mind can detect. And recognizing that this is simply an expression of nature. Nothing wrong. Even the part of us that might feel like something is wrong or needs to change, this is also nature. Even the part of us that needs this moment to be different doesn't need to be different. So the formal practice will end when the bell goes silent. Perhaps noticing that even the mention at the end of the practice brings in a pressure in the body, a pressure to move, a time pressure in the mind. Recognizing that these two are simply nature. These two are simply among the natural pressures of a system craving to change its present experience. Not a problem, but not our master. Staying with the practice, staying in stillness, allowing a tiny bit of light to enter the eyes, and eventually allowing the eyes to rest on a single point as they fully open. Again, often the addition of visual information will increase the sense of a need to move or adjust. And simply noticing this is another pressure. Recognizing it as nature, allowing a bit of compassion. And in this way, recognizing that all of our drives, all of the parts of us that move us throughout our day are simply nature, deserving of compassion. And in this way, allowing this particular moment to be the great teacher that shows us how we might bring this practice into every aspect of our life. Okay. Now comes the fun part. Adjusting the body in any way you'd like in order to feel comfortable. Oops, one sec. As people are beginning to report what that experience was like. If you're unfamiliar with what we do here, at this point, I'm going to invite folks to type in, write down their experience of what that meditation was like, challenges, interests, opportunities, things that came up. You can also, for reports, you can also jump into our Discord, our Zoom. But let me know if you want to do that, because we don't launch it until someone says, I want to join. Let me know what that was like. I have here a little bowl with some bait in it. This is some bait. What we're going to do is bait an animal. Sila! Sila! The sound of the bait hitting a surface is what activates this animal's instinct system. Come on. She's tired. She had a big weekend. Come Come on, Sila. I don't know if she's going to move off the couch. Oh, there she comes. Come here, Sila. Come here, baby. Here. Sila. Come here. I think we got it. We've caught one. She always gets caught in all the cords, all the headphone cords. Look who it is. It's the little Sila. Oh, she's squirmy. Little squirmer. She's such a sweetheart. So we had such a nice weekend with her. In the journey space where I go, the person who's there has a beautiful dog that they get to hang out, and she never gets to play so much with other dogs except for that time. So it's like a fun time for her. It's an intense time for me, but it's nice. My little darling. Hello, say hi to folks. Hello. Aww, what a sweetie. She's very sweet. Her personality, it's sort of just coming out, and she's just sort of like a little sweetie. Pretty good for a puppy. Okay, baby. Get out of here. No more food for you. Okay. Hopefully that was a sweet little added piece of compassion. I feel like animals are so good at that, embodying compassion. Okay. So folks, tell me what your experience was like in that meditation, and I will happily... oh, you want more snacks. Okay, so, and I'll happily I'll listen to that. Okay, so Jean says, my system generally liked being told, may you be peaceful. As the message reached some part that were uncomfortable, I realized that I had been repeating it too insistently. This is a very good intuition. So part of this meditation, there's a lot of parts, and if you try to like follow everyone exactly, it can be challenging. So really what it is a bit of an intuitive process of looking at the different ways things are happening and what's going on, and then adjusting, so that the idea that you're saying something too insistently is actually really helpful. There's a part of you that's realizing, hey, this isn't working too insistently, that I was kind of screaming in my head instead of feeling freaked out. I decided to find it amusing and stopped. Yeah, and that's just a good intuition. Hey, it seems like this one part is being more insistent than it needs to, which is helpful because it shows us another part that's getting yelled at. We can sort of check in and be like, how does that part feel? Like does it like that? Does it feel good about that? Does it feel good about being like having a phrase yelled at it? And then we can start to find these variations of these different parts No, my sweetie, little sweet doggo. So the point of it all is, okay, so drop your reports and we'll talk about those, and I'll also talk about my journey. So let me pull up, I started making a kind of catalog of what happened in my journey. I recorded it and was going through, and I was like, all this stuff I remembered. It's like, holy crap, there's so many things. So I'll read some of it and I'll just give you a little bit of background. So if you're not familiar with the way that I teach and some of the things that I'm interested in, one of the things that's very important to me is what's called the multiple self model, or also paralleling with internal family systems. So the general premise is that there are different parts of us, and often our challenges come because these different parts are either in conflict or they feel like they don't have their own voice. So one example is that often when we get really upset and we're overwhelmed, often overwhelm is a part of us that feels like it needs to scream because it's not heard when it's quiet, and it's like says like, I think something might be wrong. I think something might be wrong, and we don't address its needs at that point. And so if we don't address its needs, it gets louder and louder until it's just completely screaming, and then it just takes over. So part of it is to find these parts of ourselves and meet their needs, their fundamental sort of wholesome underlying need, and in that way calming the system down. This is one of the theories around addiction, is that we have a need for connection and love and care and excitement and interest and this kind of thing. So we try cocaine because it's going to fill all those things temporarily, and the problem is that it doesn't really work terribly well. So if we can meet those needs. Otherwise, this is sort of part of the structure of like a recovery community often, is to meet the sense of a need of community and a sense of connection and a sense of interest and a sense of, these kind of things, a sense of duty, and that we can be of service to other people. Meeting all these needs, suddenly the person miraculously doesn't need to use substances, which is quite impressive. Hello. I think I have would you mind? I have a water out somewhere, I think. Would you mind? Thank you. So that is, that's the case. So what we're talking about, this multiple self model, and that is, oh my goodness, it's so full. Thank you, dear. It's exactly 750 milliliters full. Okay. So that's part of the key, is what I'm talking about. So that's going to be central in this report that I'm going to give. Okay, so what I'm going to do, guys, just so it's not interrupted, I'm going to give my report from the Psychedelic Journey, and then afterwards I'll do reports here, because I see there's some good reports here. I really want to get to these. If I don't get you to a report, check out the playback on our YouTube, and we can go from there. So the part that was central in this particular journey was this part, which is effectively what I've talked about before as my most vulnerable part. Parts will name themselves often. So this part said at some point, this is a few journeys ago, that the name that it preferred was Shelley, which I appreciate. It's a very sweet little sweet name. And so a lot of this journey was involved with Shelley. Again, this can sound very very silly, but more so it can sound very like, oh yeah, I'm just talking about this part named Shelley, blah blah blah. Even saying that out loud is that part is like, oh no, like this is so vulnerable. So it's very interesting for me to talk about this sort of primordial part of this system, this body mind, that's like incredibly vulnerable, and then to talk about that part's experience. So I just want to share that first. And so when we start talking about it, yeah, it's just interesting talking about something from such a vulnerable place. So and I'll say some of this stuff, and it's like, some of it's kind of sad, I'll just be honest. Some of it's sad because a lot of what Shelley feels is this sense of shame, like it's like Shelley's not good enough and has to remain really small, and that the vulnerability is actually a problem, that if it didn't have that vulnerability, then it would be okay, and the world would be okay, and people wouldn't, be mean to this part because, it wouldn't have this vulnerability. That's one of the sort of its nature. So I'll just read some of the stuff that was like quote I was saying during the experience, and I'll just give people a little bit of a background. This particular experience was sort of large dose of MDMA, or a very specific dose based on my body size and experience, and then that's followed by a good chunk of psilocybin hours later. So the majority of the stuff where there's actual talking is the first part. Oh, doggy, what are you doing back there? And the second part is actually just this sort of sounds funny, but the second part is just mainly weeping. That's what the recording is. It's just me weeping for like hours. Because in large part because I found this sort of pool of sort of very deep sadness. So Shelley feels like she has to fight for the right to exist, that there is a point at which, because at certain points I'm speaking from her voice, and at one point she was saying, like, why are people so unkind to each other? Like, it's so painful to experience that. And there is a recognition that she does not realize that vulnerability is actually a strength. And there was a point I was doing IFS therapy and realizing that vulnerability, if it expands and sort of is allowed to be a strength, it has this incredible sort of really intense power. It reminds me of the Hindu god Kali, where it's like, really powerful. It also reminds me a little bit of Nina Simone, who's a musician who feels like so powerfully vulnerable that it's just like, it's incredibly powerful in this way. Let's see. Oh, that that Shelley feels hard, like it's difficult to feel love, it's difficult to accept love, and that's part of what the meditation we did today was whatever the part is, whatever that part feels is the pain or difficulty that it feels, that it can't take that in, that we can accept at this moment you have a hard time taking that in, and that's okay, which is very important for me. There was also a section where I was what happened, this is a internal family systems theory on couples relationships. What happens often or sometimes with Raquel and I is that a certain part of me and a certain part of her will come into conflict, and then the other parts of us are like, why is there a conflict here? This seems really, this doesn't really make a lot of sense, but those parts are clashing. And so part of the journey was that part of me, the vulnerable part of me, sort of talking about and interacting with the vulnerable part of Raquel. Raquel was not there for this journey. She's been there in the past, but wasn't there. And so there's a lot of compassion in this feeling of like, oh, I know your pain. I know why it's so hard. And so there's so much difficulty in really feeling empathy across that line and understanding why there's this conflict that arises. And then this sense of, there's a ton of this stuff, so I won't go through all of it, but so there's a sense of Shelley feeling like they can't believe that it's okay to feel these feelings, that's even like acceptable, that they don't have to pretend to be someone else. And then the guide said that it's so much easier to be with somebody who's vulnerable. It's actually, people prefer that, and that's a that you don't have to be guarded, and with being with somebody who's vulnerable is actually very relieving, and then the other person doesn't feel like they have to put on a mask in this kind of way. So that was actually very relieving for Shelley to hear. And then let's see here. And then there was this big period where I was embodying Shelley, or rather I let Shelley take over the whole body and was just sort of looking around. And these parts have a very limited view. They view the world through their own perspective. And so when we get into this work, I was allowing Shelley to sort of occupy the body and feel what it feels like to be more than just this little area. My experience is that Shelley's like way down in my lower abdomen on the left. And, it was nice because she could see the world, which she usually can't. It's usually very hunkered down, and it's her own view, and she could feel the world, which is very lovely. Let's see. And that, she was saying that usually she only takes over when there's a crisis, when she's like so freaked out that she'll either take over or have another part take over because it's too much. So it's so nice to be able to experience the world when there's no problem, there's no crisis going on. And also this thing that Shelley felt like there's so many obligations she's trying to manage in the world, and it's this part, this very vulnerable part, thinking that they have to deal with the whole world. So this very vulnerable part of myself thinking that if it doesn't manage everything, then nothing will be okay. It can't actually just let go and be vulnerable and let things be as they are. And this has been something I've been talking with Raquel a lot about recently, that there is some part of me, especially when stress is high, that has a hard time letting things be as they are. I think that in our art school, there's a lot of effort and energy put towards whatever you do, make it a 10, make it better, improve it, straighten things out and correct things and this kind of thing, which is excellent for art making, but it's not so good for, living a life where you don't need to change things and things don't need to be different. So that's part of it, is not interacting with the world in that way. So I'm going to open up to questions here. Okay, I want to go to reports in a second. I'm missing 2 reports here, but I think Alex Rainleaf is saying something in relationship to the journey material, so I just want to read this real quick. I recently had an experience of attending a day-long retreat and experienced something similar, but it turned up to 11. Literally couldn't continue sitting still, relaxing. I wonder if you had a thought on what this may be about and how to handle it should it come up again. Thanks. So that's a really great question. So what that probably is, and again, this is a bit of conjecture, you want to explore this for yourself, it's some part that just felt overwhelmed. Sometimes when we even just contact a part, it can be like, whoa, like my role typically is that I kind of hide out in the background and will manage things or try to do things or etc. from the background. I'm not used to coming to the foreground. Now for me, what I found in this particular journey was that Shelley had a lot of fear of feeling the feelings, that feeling the vulnerable feelings felt really, scary or nerve-wracking. So part of my job was to take that fear and actually sort of put that in a box. There's a box that I use psychologically for storage, and I just put things into it, and it's the same box I always use, and I just put it there. And the guide was very sweet. She said, we can fill the box with feathers so that the fear is like very soft in there. And it's just amazing how much, in this kind of scenario that works. It was just like so relieving. It's like, oh, the fear doesn't have to be in some tight little contained thing. It can be in this like soft area. It's like, okay, cool. And it opened everything up and felt very lovely in this certain way. Oh, it's related to the report above. Okay, well, listen, we'll do the best we can. So I'll get back to the report above coming soon. Okay, so excellent. So then let me jump back into some of my reporting here. Hopefully this is interesting. Let me know if this is of interest, because it's funny. It's like, I'll talk about the most vulnerable experience I've ever had. And, it's fully unedited. I just wrote this stuff down from, listening to the transcript, and now I'm just reading it to you. So it's pretty much, it's like you were there. And then it's interesting because part of the multiple self model and IFS material is that you can be with parts too. So you can talk to them, you can be them, you can embody them yourself, you can have them talk to each other. And so there's a number of sections here where I'm talking to Shelley. And I remember saying to Shelley, hey, we're here, we love you so much. And it was me and the guide just being with Shelley, and Shelley soaking that in. So it's a really interesting sort of thing about identification, where are you in relationship to these various things. I recalled, so this is in the journey, I am telling the guide that I recently told Shelley a joke, telling her that Shelley's really young. That's the other thing, you can kind of find ages of these parts, and it's really young. I'm thinking 3 or something like that. That's the general age. And I remember, so I'm telling the guide during the journey, I told Shelley this joke recently, and so I tell the guide the joke in order so she can know. But the joke is, it's a kid's joke, the joke is, what's brown and sticky? And the guide is like, what? And I said, a stick. And it was very cute and sweet and sort of silly. And just talking about how Shelley loves that joke. She thought it was when I told Shelley that joke is when I was guiding someone else in meditation, and I was telling them that you can talk to this particular part. And Shelley was cracking up, thought it was hilarious, it was such a good joke, which is funny because I know the joke. I know that joke. I've told that joke to kids, when they're at the right age for that to work. And I know the joke. Shelley didn't know the joke. And that's one of the things that's really interesting about these parts, is how sort of state specific they are. They know their own experience of the world, and they often don't know outside of that. I've taught certain parts of me meditation. They had no idea how meditation worked, that you could hold awareness, that you could settle down in these ways. It's very interesting how these parts are sort of disintegrated or splintered, and often carrying a burden that they can't handle, so they're very overwhelmed. And part of our job is to help these parts integrate with each other and connect in this way. Let's see. Here's a quote. This is a quote from Shelley. Later on, the guide says, I love how Shelley's coming out. And then Shelley says, I feel like the world is very soft and gentle. I feel like it's nice to meet the world. It's so nice to not be so small, because often because there's this sort of vulnerability, it often feels like it needs to be as small as possible. And that need to be small, in my experience, is what's called shame. When I think about that sort of need, that pressure to be small, I feel fear, and I feel like it's somehow bad to feel the sadness, and then there's a sadness of being alone. So what I found, and I think, is a lot of this vulnerable part, comes from big swaths of time growing up where I was quite alone. Either, I had a pretty tumultuous childhood. There was a lot of, excuse me, pardon me. There was a lot of, just general trauma, kind of family drug use, volatility. My father was very dangerous and was a big substance user and was kind of violent and this kind of thing. So there was generally sort of the thing of like people dealing with a crisis, which was my father, and also needing their own rest. And I was just a small child, and also just generally being alone. A lot of my childhood was just wandering around in the woods alone, because there was either people not there or this kind of thing. And so a lot of this, there's this sort of primordial sadness that really felt infinite the first time I had came in contact with it in a journey. And it felt like this is endless, but it felt very important to feel. And then after that journey of just, hours and hours of weeping and weeping going into this, it felt like a percentage was was gone. Like it felt like it was worked through. And it was a recognition then that it wasn't infinite, because it couldn't be reduced if it was infinite. It is just very big. And so that's part of what this journey was an awareness of this sadness, sort of talking about this. Let's see. There's this underlying feeling, there's this underlying sense that I shouldn't feel my feelings, that they're so big that if I feel them, they'll just completely destroy me. When I feel the pain, it feels, so when I feel the pain, it says, I feel the pain most when I feel alone. So it's reinforcing. So it's like, I feel alone. The pain is increasing. I don't like this. I don't like being alone. So it creates this kind of feedback loop where it, sort of seems to get worse. And then at some point I asked the guide, this is sort of why it's very important to have a guide through a lot of this stuff. I said, to the guide, will you hold the fear for me? Sort of speaking from Shelley's voice. And then this is where she said, why don't we put it in a box? Why don't we find some place to put it that's soft and sort of self-contained and is a safe place for the fear. And then it got to a place where I said, listen to Shelley, like this is a nice opportunity. There's no pressure, but we have the fear put aside for now. And then there's this kind of big, there's just certain points when it's just like a big relief sigh, and you can hear my voice actually change. Like the voice suddenly becomes much more relaxed. It's like, And then this is the last thing I have reported from what I have. This is actually only like an hour and a half in of this, 6-hour thing, which is that Shelley then says, it feels so relieving to not have to feel the fear and to be able to feel the sadness. And not having the fear is like so relieving. And so the last thing I want to mention, which is sort of became very key at the end of this journey, was the pain was like the last part was, with the psilocybin part, and it was just feeling a lot of the sadness, looking for the sadness, feeling it, etc. But what was very interesting is it was basically this, it was like, it sounds so weird and embarrassing to say or somehow, but it's just like hours of weeping, just like intense weeping. And at some point something switched, and this can happen. All of a sudden it was just like incredibly relieving, and it was just this really intense, peaceful place. And the pain was still there, but it was incredibly peaceful. And then for the last, hour and a half or something like that, it was just in this very peaceful place. Occasionally I would cry a little bit, and part of what I realized at that point, and part of the exploration there, was finding, and this is going to sound very strange, but finding the aspects of the pain that feel good. And it's not like I recommend this for people, because it sounds so like, I don't know, like Pollyanna-ish, or like, just feel the good side of the pain. It's like, I don't think so, man. This pain is pretty overwhelming most of the time. But for whatever reason, in that moment, with that constellation of pieces, with feeling safe with Toby and sort of the medicine, etc., I was able to really tune into the experience of the okay, safe, and actually just pleasurable sense quality of the discomfort. And it was basically having a lot of equanimity and feeling the sort of pressures and movements of the sensation of the pain, of the sadness, and it actually feeling very pleasurable, which is a very strange scenario, which I would not have believed or understood if it weren't for a lot of the meditation which I've done, which many of you, if you know Shinzen, you know that is like a possible thing that people can do. So that was a lot of, that's basically, that was the whole end of the process, was that, and sort of settling into that experience in that way. So that was my general experience. So I will open it up to questions and thoughts on that. Okay, so Jean says, yes, it's super interesting. Oh, and then the bot here posted a link to our 15 essential guided meditations, which I recommend to everyone. Yeah, any questions or responses or anything like that about the journey, about how that works and that kind of thing? I will mention, last time I talked about this, a lot of people wanted to know how do they do this kind of work. And the answer was basically like, I can't share it at a public level because, right now a lot of the work is, pre-approval. It's not allowed. However, what I didn't realize was that there is an aspect of it that is entirely legal. And that right now is the sort of guided work around ketamine. I want to give a warning here immediately, which you hear me give often, which is that the difference between using a street substance recreationally without a guide and between that and using a guide is just the difference between night and day. It's so fundamentally different. So that's what I would say. With that said, if you want to find a guide, there are centers that have people who've been trained in the MAPS protocol. The MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. They've been trained in MAPS, and they will guide you through the use of ketamine, which is legal in the United States if it's legally obtained and administered and this kind of thing. So there are people who can do that, and so I just want to let folks know. If I can find a list of the people that are sanctioned to do that, I'll see if I can pop that into the one of the streams. But I don't necessarily recommend it per se because it's very different for different people. But it's been very useful for me, and that was actually the first guided process that I did, was using the ketamine. I will also say that doing it recreationally or doing it solo is very much, at least this is from my perspective, not a good idea. I knew one person who was using it sort of for spiritual exploration and sort of doing this, but they were doing it on their own, and they, fully, it has a narcotic quality, and it was very hard for them to manage. It was not like the kind of thing where, if you're working with a doctor, they have a very specific dose, they know the sort of withdrawal time, they do it over the course of a certain number of days, you don't have access to more of it, this kind of thing. And I remember after the experience, part of me was like, it was very drowsy after the ketamine experience, and part of me was like, oh, I could imagine my system getting very, very interested in this as a way of managing stress and emotion and challenges. And I was like, oh, good thing I don't have the choice of that. I have a doctor sort of managing this for me. So I would not recommend doing it solo style. So awesome. So those are the general, that's the general case. I'll go back and look at these reports from folks who did the meditation here. Okay, Nick says, guidance got me into some sweet whole body breathing before a timely business call. Probably helpful. The interaction came back in the middle and didn't get any resistance then, even to I love you. Was surprised about that. That's great. That's nice to know that some part of the system was sort of open to that at that given moment. Lovely to hear, and glad that you're able to connect with the full body breathing. That's something that people often will struggle with for a long time to locate. Alex Rainleaf says, my body was quite peaceful until I introduced the compassionate phrase. So this is very interesting. I felt, first I felt pain in my back, then a vibratory feeling fill my whole body, heat and nausea. Okay, so these are some big effects. That's very interesting. It became quite uncomfortable, and I recognized that it was definitely resistance. Yeah, and resistance will come in any one of those forms. It could be the mind talking, it could be emotion in the body, it could be any one of these things. I tried to soothe that part and the other phrases, but it didn't settle down. Okay, and that's important. Significantly until near the end, when we expanded awareness back out. I was glad I was able to stay in stillness until the end, though. Okay, great. So you give a little more here, so I'll just talk about this for a second. It's always good to just listen to the parts, and there's times when the parts will just be like, no, we're done. So just know that it's not always the best to be like, I'm going to power through, I'm going to push through. Maybe that part actually needs a break, and maybe actually the thing that we could do that's the most compassionate is just to stop meditating, and that's okay. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and I think it sounds like you handled that really well. And then you said, okay, I had the experience at a day long, and it was the same experience except it was turned up to 11. So there's a good chance that what you're dealing with is some emotion or set of emotions or sort of emotional habit groove that is very old, potentially. Either way, it's quite intense. And so the system's not primed to sort of feel it easily. So this is one of those things where you want to be very careful going in, very careful with all the parts, knowing what works for you. You don't, sometimes with meditation, the sense is like diving in is the way to go, but it can actually be a nice slow process where you just pay attention to those sensations while you take a jog or do a walk or, look around, in nature, and just let those be part of the mix of your sensations. It's not always the case like you noticed today. Sometimes bearing down on it is too much, but allowing it to have space can be very, very relieving. So it's going to depend on you, depend on the moment, these kind of things. So that's the general breakdown, what I would suggest there. There's also a book that's very good that I recommend called The Body Keeps the Score. It goes into detail about some of these sort of sensations and these things, if that is of interest. Ruben says, thanks for sharing. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting to have, and happy to have you here. Alex Rainley says, that sounds so wonderful and helpful. Well done, very inspiring. Well, that's lovely. Thank you so much. I'm glad that was helpful. I always find that people get interested when I do the prelude to and then the report from my most recent journey. This journey was particularly interesting because other ones have felt in a way more disruptive, and I talked about this in previous streams recently, I think I've had contact with this other part and a different part that I'm describing here, and it's this part that is actually, interestingly, it's different, and it's more based on like a primordial sense of safety and is sort of existentially more concerned about like survival, like is it okay, is reality safe? And what I've found is that part that is sort of concerned, like, is reality itself like fundamentally safe, is also the place where I can have a sense of really deep safety. And what I've noticed is the places where I feel stress, the places where I feel like maybe reality needs to change or something is wrong in my experience, is the same place in the body that I might feel safety and security and peace. And so something about that has felt incredibly grounding and has brought a lot of stability to my system. So this particular journey, I sort of came out and I was like, okay, cool. Like, this is okay. This is not such a big deal. Whereas the last one is really emotional for like weeks and weeks afterwards, and really almost felt like an entire month before I sort of got settled again. But this is a lovely journey, and it was like really fun to do it. And it's also very fun always to share this with you guys. So folks, lovely as always to have you here. And for you, I have one more thing, which is a lovely wish. The wish is as follows. So right now, right here in this present moment, is just to look around your current experience, to look at this strange, weird world, to notice that we experience this world through all of these different filters of the eyes, filters of touch, sensation, and sound, interpreting all these various vibrations and movements of our senses into a sense of a world and a self. And we also experience the filters of the mind and the emotions in the body. And it's not just the scenes that we paint with the mind, the worlds that we create like an imaginary fantasy novel. It is also the worlds of emotion that color and paint our experience in this particular moment. And so to know that all of this is natural, our pain, while difficult and important to work through, important to get support around, is nature, is an expression of life. And often that pain is indicating to us that there's something we need to get through, to move through in order to feel peace. And it's by facing our pain with proper support, with proper connection, with the love and care of those around us, that we get to feel freedom. It's a strange bargain by entering into the darkness, entering into the challenge, moving through the fire. We get to come out the other side. By feeling more pain, by actually experiencing that which feels impossible, we actually get to be more free. And it's my wish that in this moment we can simply accept our experience, whatever it is, as nature, as another expression. Just like sunlight hits the eye and creates beautiful colors, just like sensations hit the body and produce all of these warm, moving, vibratory sensations that we feel. The way sound ripples against the ear, creating all sorts of beautiful tones and music. In the same way, our emotions ripple through and affect the body in these complex, elegant, and very specific, unique ways. Their uniqueness is their magic. So to allow, in whatever way that we can, a kind, compassionate relationship to these powerful and mysterious tones of emotion in the body. And in this way, to carry this practice forward to affect ourselves and all of those around us who might find freedom from their pain through our example. And in this way, bringing this practice into every aspect of our life. As always, practice well, take care of each other, have fun, and we'll see you very,